Woldingham station, first light. An early start today for an exploration of an area called World's End, and in particular a story of a house through time known as End Cottage. Starting here at Church Road, right by the station, and just to my left here is Station Cottage. The cottage sits quite high up on the hill. It's an old building and there's been some more modern development on the back, but this is actually in Church Road. Stay tuned for how it fits into the story a bit later on. So, why World's End? The story begins when I saw a post on Facebook on the Excellent Urban Countryman Facebook page, and it was asking a question about whether anyone knew the history of the ruin called World's End Cottage. World's End stands out on an Ordnance Survey map. It's a designated area at the very top of a hill, and I've done the research. So I think I can tell a pretty comprehensive story of the house, and in particular the people that lived in the house. World's End sort of sits between Marden Park and Tillingdown, and in fact when doing the research it was a challenge to work out in census returns and other such documents where it actually sat in terms of, was it Tillingdown, was it Marden Park, was it Godstone, was it Tandridge, was it Caterham? So it's mainly a country walk, and it involves a bit of a hill climb to start with, and I'll gradually fill in the story as we make our way. Well, it's a bit wet and it's a bit fresh, but it's generally a lovely winter morning. A couple of horses being led out in the distance there from the farm. I think that's Church Road Farm on the left. And then we go right here to Marden Park Farm. Crossing the railway bridge here. Just missed a train go through. That's a nice scene there, isn't it? I just let the lens tune in a bit. Hopefully picks out those lovely colours in the sky. I consulted the excellent Surrey footpath map to plan the route. We've got a few footpath signs here. There's Woldingham Countryside Walk. And because of the orientation of what I'm trying to focus on, getting here at first light made perfect sense, really. Plus it's just nice to be up and out in these mornings. Short days and long nights. This is Shires, it says on the wall there. And the breeding of Shire horses is something that took place here a lot. I mean, it may still go on, I don't know. You tell me in the comments. Also note the revetted wall there. Helps strengthen it, keep it upright. Try and pick out this sky again. You sort of have to hold the camera there to let the lens adjust, but it's a pretty nice scene through there. And the official footpath takes us through this sort of courtyard area here. We've got all the signs on the post. West Stables and a pigeon. Is that East Stables? I'm not sure. This is not so much of a loop as a go one way and come back the same way today. So we see different perspectives. I will be watching where I tread, as one should always do. And I've got the walking poles with me just in case, because it can be a bit steep, and one of my channel members, Martin, warned me of the fact that it's a bit slippery up there. Alpacas. Don't seem to mind the cool conditions. I'll put a link in the description below to the other video that I did here, and it was done at a similar time of year, but you'll see the fact that I've covered some similar ground. I like to do that sometimes, cross over, but perhaps take a different route, have a different focus or subject for the film. Now I would say there's mist there, and I believe there is mist, but I can also smell smoke. So I think on the left of the picture it's probably some remnants of a bonfire smouldering, but isn't that beautiful? All part of the Marden Park estate. There's a little junction here where we're going to turn off to the right and then climb, which, well, I'll point it out anyway, but you can see with your own eyes that's a pretty sharp and steep climb up there. So I'm going to go round again from the bonfire, the atmospheric bonfire. So still, bird song, very distant noise of traffic. School is up that way. That was Marden Lodge. And climb over, it's a little bit frosty here, so I'm holding tight. And the first part of the climb. You can get an idea here that we've had some rather wet weather recently. After an extremely dry summer and spring, really. I observed rabbit droppings, short footsteps, and stay on the grass for the best grip. Some sort of digging activity there. Normally I say look up, don't I, if we're in buildings and things, but it's looking everywhere today, certainly looking down where I'm going to put my feet. Lovely view there of the mist. Got the full winter sky experience there across the valley. So, improved view by East Surrey Walkers Group of the Ramblers in association with Surrey County Council on behalf of the landowner. Well, that's very kind. Great job, guys. Steady climb over. Okay, so there's like a step arrangement here, which I didn't realise, and that's very good, which no doubt will be part of the improvements, I would assume. I think it would be a tough call if that work hadn't been done. This is really helpful. There's some tree fall there. Moss growing on there for quite some time, I would expect. Yeah, well, the view's amazing. I love this. The light hitting the wood. The tree bark, lovely. So we've climbed through the steep woody bit. We're now in a more open section. It still climbs up. And then more of a grass path here, which perhaps will get muddier as the winter goes on, but it's a very nice path right now, here and now. The first reference from my research was the tithe maps. One for this area was drawn up in 1842. It shows the layout of the fields and the boundaries pretty much as they are today. There's a building. It's not occupied or unoccupied. It could just be a barn or a very small enclosure. In the document, it references Park Shore, it references the wood, it references arable land, no buildings mentioned. The landowner is William Clayton, and the occupier is William Washbourne. He was married up in London, up in Southwark, but he was based at Tillingdown farm. So at that particular time, this area was part of the Tillingdown farm collection when it was mapped in accordance with the tithe map exercise. And he was a farmer, and he would have looked after this land. So we're at the top here now, the plateau. And I still hear the distant hum of traffic on the A22, maybe even the M25. In an 1849 document, there is reference to William Washbourne, leaseholder, Tillingdown farm. 1851 census, his wife and their children are located at Tillingdown, but he is not there. And his story is that he went to New Zealand, became a farmer there, family joined him, additions to the family, and he died in New Zealand. And there was a demand for farming skills at that time, a couple of times in the 19th century. So William Washbourne, originally Tillingdown, answered that call. Now, between 1861 and 1901, there's nothing that I can see that relates to a property in this area. So that structure that was in the tithe map in 1842 may have been something or nothing, just related to the general operation of the farm. In the 1901 census, there is, however, a reference to Park Shore Cottage. Henry Knowles is there with his wife Elizabeth and daughter Alice, and he is shown as a poultryman. So that's the first time we see any reference to a building in the location of World's End, called Park Shore Cottage, but occupied as a cottage, as a dwelling. Now, bear with me with this fact. 1909, Arthur Edward Jupp married Fanny Elizabeth Skilton in Caterham. His address at the time was 7 Farningham Road. Now, I understand that the names Jupp and Skilton are still quite strongly associated with the wider Caterham area. So some of that story is quite key to my research findings about World's End. But if you are connected in some way to the Jupps or the Skiltons, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Now, in 1910, there was what was known as the Lloyd George survey carried out, or the Valuation Office survey. And the map that was completed at that time shows a very detailed structure for Park Shore Cottage. Normally, you can reference the numbers on the map to the entry in the books that they completed, and I was quite keen, once I'd seen the detailed plot, that I could go and get all the information I needed, but unfortunately that wasn't to be the case. It seemed that the entry was wrapped up in the wider buildings of Marden Park, so I couldn't actually gain anything, which is a bit sad really. But 1911 census, Park Shore Cottage listed again, Alfred and Louisa Alderman, and Alfred is known as a carter on the farm. Here is the remaining structure of, well, Park Shore Cottage, otherwise known as World's End Cottage. And we see the flint. I believe we can see some possible revetments that we saw earlier on in the Shires area, and the structure that was on the first map would have been here somewhere, so I'm not convinced it was an actual building, but obviously nearby was deemed to be a good location for a proper family home. In 1915, Alfred Edward Jupp joined the Army Veterinary Corps. In 1920, his address was still 7 Farningham Road. In the 1921 census, his address, along with his wife and family, is here at World's End Cottage. So it wasn't called Parkshaw Cottage at that time, it was World's End Cottage. So he's there in 1921. And he's actually there throughout the 20s. In fact, there's an entry on the electoral roll for the Jupps all the way up until 1934. There was an interesting entry also in the newspaper for 1933 where Marden Park Estate held an annual estate day for the staff that worked there. So this was held in August typically. There would be games, there would be prizes, fruit and vegetable prizes, tugs of war, that sort of thing. And Mrs. Jupp in 1933 won a prize for a £2 fruitcake, which would no doubt have been baked here at World's End Cottage. Now in 1935 in the electoral roll, there's no entry for World's End Cottage. And the Jupps have moved to Station Cottage, which we saw right at the beginning of the walk opposite the station. It was the home originally for the station master. And I couldn't find any reference from 1935 onwards to an occupier of World's End Cottage. So the Jupps being here for 14 years or so, post Great War, up until they moved to the Station Cottage, this would have been their home. Their whole way of life would have been based around this location. Pretty solid structure there, the use of flints. Again, like the Shire's building earlier, we've got the chimney just here on the right. Or what would have been the chimney. There's a girder there, some sort of steel RSJ type thing. I'm suggesting it was built at a similar time to the other estate buildings, or some of the other estate buildings. But it's just here now as a relic, as a ghost. Trying to get some different angles. So this is the rear of the chimney. And there's a tree that's come down in the middle of the building. So that revetment, very similar to what we saw at the Shires down at the start of the walk. But panning around in amongst the trees, it was not a small property. All the way over there, so far distance. We've got more buildings, solid structures. And then that comes round to the front here. So I don't know what it looked like originally. If you have any photos, any drawings, anything, I would absolutely love to see them. It would help to tell the story. I found one aerial view from 1946. There seems to be quite a dominant roof, almost like a barn roof. So whilst this was listed as a home that people lived in, it may have transferred to just storage, you know, just sort of barn storage on the farm. So that was almost on the brow of the hill, the cottage. But there's a good reason why we're going back down the hill towards Tillingdown, but not all the way. That would have been quite a mature tree there. So I walked part of this a couple of summers ago. It was where I thought I could get through and I couldn't. So I kind of went back this way. And whilst you can walk through the path all the way up to the Tillingdown development, just at the top of the hill there, this in the middle here was a rifle range. And I also kind of wanted to point out the contours. So very hilly here. The rifle range was in the valley. But very hilly indeed. So if you think of all those contours, this is still quite a climb here that we're going back up towards the cottage. So Tillingdown's got a fair few hills and a valley, and then we've got that first climb on the other side where it's very steep. I was panting, as you know, and there's a house here. How do you get to the house? How do you get deliveries to the house? Does the house meet the needs? Now, in a very rural Woldingham, albeit development was starting to increase perhaps by then in the 30s, if it was just not permitted to have any form of vehicle access to this building, what do? You cut and run. You exit the property and you just leave it. And again, the 1940s image, perhaps, if it was a barn mainly used for storage, then there was a roof over whatever was needed. But it was just not practical to live here as a family. Some of the earlier occupations were carters, so you drove a horse and cart. If you worked with horses, Jupp was a shy horse worker. The 1939 register showed that. That's fine if you're in that world and you're working on the farm, you work with horses and you can use a horse to get to your house. But certainly for the modern world. So I think that's it. I think mid-30s, decisions taken. In fact, the original occupier, Alfred Coomber, who was in Station Cottage, moved to 2 Church Road. So he stayed on the estate, stayed in the general area. Yeah, I just think it just wasn't worth maintaining a house here because you perhaps weren't allowed or you just couldn't get vehicles here. And we were becoming more reliant on vehicles. And that was it. It was just left to go derelict. Despite all of that, if you got up for your morning cup of tea and had a wander round either the wood here, Parkshire Wood, or almost any other view around the property, you would have been spoilt, I'm sure. End Cottage. I assume built in Victorian times. Occupied for a few decades. Exited in the mid-1930s. In 1951, quite a bit of the Tillingdown farm estate was sold, but again, I'm thinking that was on the other side of the boundary. Talking of which, on the boundary, I was looking at boundary areas when trying to work out where this actually sat, and I found this lovely map reference. So it's like the dotted boundary line, and it's 3FTRH, which means the boundary is 3 feet from the root of the hedge. How cool is that? Works best if there's a hedge. Fanny Jupp died in 1962, Arthur Jupp died in 1975, and they're both buried in a joint plot at St Agatha's Church in Woldingham. But as I mentioned before, I'd be keen to hear from you in the comments if you're connected to the Jupps or the Skiltons, particularly if you have anything that relates to the property here. There could be a family picture taken with a house behind the family. You just don't know, even though we didn't take anything like as many photos in those days as we do today. Very much a case now of enjoying this countryside and negotiating the pathway. Ah, the low winter sun. The walking poles have now been put away. I have descended from that marvellous high point and back on tarmac. So we're going to pass through the shires again and we'll observe some of those properties to make a call, a judgment on whether we think some of them were built at the same time as Parkshire Cottage / End Cottage. So that's stepping stones here. I'm assuming these were all workers' cottages back in the day. It says Hunter Cottage, Deer Park Cottage, Farrier and Groom, all related to equine activities in one way or the other. And even with more modern renovations, there's probably still a nod to the building design style of the time. I love that winter sunlight. Plays havoc with the camera angles sometimes, but really lovely. But this section here, I do see, with the revetment there, I do see parts of what we just saw at World's End there. Morning. Oh, lovely. Morning. There's no chimney stacks here that we can see, but look at my shadow. I look very tall, don't I? Like one of those men on stilts at the circus. But anyway, this is the revetment. Very similar to World's End. Lovely. Oh, look at those berries. There's a term golden hour in photography, and I think in the winter, if you get it right, golden hour can be literally any time of the day, purely because of the angle of the sun. It doesn't wash things out. They are beautiful. Look at that. And some dew or melted frost on a spider's web there. Don't you just love nature? A grand bird atop the tree. Nice bit of carving. That ridgeway, so from where we took the path, really quite stunning all the way along there. Don't have to go far from where I live to find some real stunning beauty as the diesel train goes under the bridge. So that's it. That was the best story I could tell of World's End Cottage. Hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, please hit like. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please hit subscribe. And if you'd like to support what I do, please hit join. Look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.